Okay, today we're going to look at ratifying the Constitution, working through Chapter 5, Section 3. And we're going to look at the conflicts that ensued once the Constitution was written and what we had to do to pass it so that it can go into effect. If you can see here from a clipping from the Boston Almanac, we see a group of men, George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, riding the federal chariot, as it's called, being pulled by 13 states heading towards ratification. So we knew that as a group we had to come together to make this Constitution able to be passed. So the Constitution itself, once it was written, once it was created, it had to be written. And so Governor Morris of New Jersey was actually given the commission to write the Constitution itself, including over 4,300 words. And he did it in 2 days, which was pretty awesome. The Constitution itself was written was signed by 39 of the 55 delegates in September of that year. Once the document was signed, it was then sent out to the states. So the delegates wrote it in the Constitutional Congress. They proposed it in September, and then the Constitution had to go out to the state legislatures to be ratified. So that's important to remember. Only the states could ratify or pass the Constitution. Now, to ratify, as you have seen when you defined your terms, ratification means to officially approve. All right? And so it was required that each state look at the Constitution and look at the powers and see if this is what they wanted. It also gave the framers a chance to campaign for delegates in their states who would support the ratification. Now, unfortunately, when the Federalists created the Constitution, there was a faction that broke off, and we call those the Anti-Federalists. These will ultimately become the first two political parties in the United States. The Federalists on one side of the Constitution liked the Constitution the way it was. They wanted a strong national government. They felt there was enough power between the federal government and the state government. And so the main leaders of the Federalists included George Washington, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton. Although Washington warned against political parties when he was leaving office, which that foreshadows into our next unit. But if we were to look at his beliefs, he tended to side with the Federalists. On the other hand, we have the Anti-Federalists. And they were opposed of the Constitution pretty much for the main fact that it took away a lot of power from the state government and power from the individual rights of the citizens. They wanted, less national power and more state power. And, famous leaders of the Anti-Federalists included Patrick Henry, Samuel Adams, and George Mason. Okay, the Anti-Federalists also had doubts that a single government could actually manage the affairs of a large country. And their leading argument was centered on the Constitution's lack of rights because it did include a Bill of Rights. So again, like the Federalists included framers of the Constitution like George Washington and James Adams and Alexander Hamilton, and their experience and their power of persuasion was used to win the support of the states to pass the Constitution. Okay, and so the Federalists received support from urban areas like the cities, and including merchants and skilled workers and laborers, and really those who could benefit from a national government regulating trade. Also about the Federalists, they believed in what we call a loose interpretation of the Constitution, as you see here. So you can almost think of it as a parent not being as strict. So if they say you're on, you can't go out after 8 o'clock, well, you may bend the rule a little bit and, okay, well then let's bring my friends over to the house if I can't go out after 8. You bended the rules. Just like the Federalists thought we should be able to bend the Constitution. They didn't want to have to write all of the powers and list them because they knew that as time went on, new things would need to be created, new powers would need to be defined that they didn't know already. So the Federalists wrote a series of debate essays known as the Federalist Papers. It was a series of 85 essays, and its main purpose was to persuade the voters to ratify the Constitution. Now, of this slide, the only thing you maybe want to make a keynote of is that it was 85 essays outlining how a new government should operate. You don't really have to document this in your notes. It's just a little side fact. But the essays were not signed by the writers, who included Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. They were actually signed Publius, which is in Latin, to not give it a definition by a person itself. They wanted it to be of the people for our country. Now, the Anti-Federalists, however, on the other hand, again, they felt liberties of the individual persons were being violated, not being included, and it created a weak central government. They wanted a weak central government to protect the people. Make sure you make note of the groups that followed the Anti-Federalists. They were the small farmers, the small landowners. Remember, whereas the Federalists were your merchants and your skilled workers and your laborers. Okay, so the Federalist was the common man. The Anti-Federalists, the main reasons that they would not accept the Constitution were the following reasons, and these are very important to note: that they felt the government had too much power at the national level. The Constitution did not include a Bill of Rights. All right, the government could maintain a peacetime army. This made the Anti-Federalists very paranoid, and they just didn't like the fact that the national government could create new powers as they deemed necessary, as in the necessary and proper clause. They thought it gave too much power. Anti-Federalists wrote a series of papers as well, including letters from the Federal Farmer, written by Richard Henry Lee, and Lee listed the rights that the Anti-Federalists thought should be protected, such as freedom of the press, freedom of religion, and the protection against unreasonable searches. And that they also, the people should have a trial by jurors and not by a single judge. So you can see here the areas of the country that were impacted and the sides they stood on. You can see where we live in northeastern North Carolina, it was primarily a Federalist state, whereas when you get back towards the Piedmont area, you start to see more of an Anti-Federalist persuasion. The northeastern part of the United States at this time tended to be progressively Federalist, whereas the southeast tended to be more Anti-Federalist. Okay. So the Federalists did win out in this, and the reason that they won is the Anti-Federalists didn't have an alternative solution or anything else to offer, and the Anti-Federalists also, pushed for a negative campaign. Unlike the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers were used more in newspaper settings and really bashing the national government and the power of the national government. So when the fight actually began for the states to ratify the Constitution, the first states that very quickly passed it were Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Georgia, and Connecticut. And if we go back, you can see why. Pennsylvania being a largely Federalist state, look at New Jersey completely, and Delaware completely a Federalist state, and Georgia, the area that it was an actual state of, was majority Federalist as well. So, guys, the only reason that the Anti-Federalists actually ratified the Constitution itself was because of this here. That the Federalists promised that they would add a Bill of Rights in to provide for individual liberties. Virginia ratified the Constitution when the Federalists agreed to the Bill of Rights. New York also ratified the Constitution only after following suit from Connecticut and New Hampshire because they didn't want to ratify it on their own. And then finally, North Carolina taking the stage. And that in 1788, all states had accepted it except for Rhode Island and North Carolina. By 1790s, both of the North Carolina will have given in and ratified the Constitution. The Bill of Rights was officially added in 1791, and hence we get the Constitution of the United States government.